my friends. It is Tuesday. No, it's not Tuesday, it's Thursday. Okay, so I'm already answering the question how I am. A little confused with the change in my schedule and some of the requirements brought on by trying to really sequester myself and wait to see whether, anyway, all that's in the background. Welcome. My name is Lou Kilgore. I'm the pastor, currently serving here at the High Mountain Presbyterian Church community, and using this opportunity through this live stream to overcome some of the isolation and separation that is the result of trying to survive a pandemic for a community. Let me go over it just to say what we're up against. I've said many, many times that human beings are created to be together. I think the ancients meant that when they said that God looked at the Adam, the first human being, not, by the way, indicated in the Hebrew as whether it was a male or female. That's something for you to think about. But when the Adam, the first human, was created and put upon the earth, out of the earth, part of the earth, a part of the essence of God, God looked at the result of God's art project and said, nope, that'll never do. Because a human being created in the image of God, who is a together being, a social being, not a solitary being, but one that lives and thrives in relationships, would never do to have the human being be alone on the earth. So what you'll remember if you're familiar with the Genesis text is that God looked and said, it is not good that a human being should be alone. Now, the overlay on this text from our culture has, I think, driven it away from its original purpose, to describe human beings as creatures that look like we are self-contained, but that we are not. We are not. Now, that's not to say sometimes you don't need to get off by yourself. That's okay. But we are relationship beings because we are created by a relationship God. And if you don't understand that, just look around. Everything around us, the buildings, the foundations and the walls, the ceilings, the stars, the trees, the earth, the plants, they're all the result of relationships, living in relationship to someone else. The plants live in relationship to the supply of water. The stars stay in their place in relationship to the gravitational force of other beings. There is not a solitary thing in this creation which is solitary. And so the ancients described that when God looked upon the whole of the creation of relationships, from microcosmic relationship to macrocosmic relationships, relationships is what creates everything we see and know. And then in our bodies, the Apostle Paul says that one organ can't say to another organ in the body, oh, I'm more important and I don't need you. Every part of the body works in relationship to everything else. It's so present that we might think you can't see it because it's so present. But the biblical witness in the beginnings, which goes back to the very beginning to find original purposes or original understandings, digging down deep into who we are, the ancients of faith said that God looked and saw that it was not good, that the human being would exist on the earth as a solitary creature. So God, now this is where I think the overlay gets lost, that God created another human being. But not another solitary human being. In this case, the Hebrew words were ish and isha, and we understand that then there was the creation of male and female, so that the next being was not exactly like the first being, but was created in relationship to the second being. This is where the word, the chauvinistic reading which said God created a helper for Adam, the male. Oh my goodness, that is just not what the Hebrews saw. That is not what they were revealing about what they knew about the creation. Male and female were drawn from the creation of the first solitary experiment of God, to see if this being made of flesh and spirit could be without relationship to other beings like it, and the answer was no. So then the primary relationship, I guess, in the world is supposed to be the goodness of relationship between males and females. That hasn't worked out so great, because the relationships between males and females on this planet are not really all that good. But in terms of Genesis, of beginnings, of original intention, we're not made to be alone. And that doesn't mean that you have to be married. That's not... Ish and Isha, Eve and Adam, were not married. They are representative of the basic structure of humanity, of human beings. We are male and female and everything in between, drawn out of each other in order to be returning to each other, to show our dependency upon each other. You cannot read the ancient texts in fear or with blinders of the contemporary time on. The ancients were deep. They were deep in their inquiry, guided by the Spirit of God to know and to understand their place, their origin, and how to best survive. It is not good for a human being to pretend that they exist in isolation of other human beings. We find our identity in relationship to the other. Males find their identity on this planet in relationship to females, wives or friends or whatever, and females in the same kind of way, in reverse. Like Mars holds its place in the solar system in relationship to Venus and to the other planets that are further beyond it, to Saturn. Everything has a relationship to help us to be who we are. Welcome to the textbook of God and of God's revealing of ourselves. Now, why am I talking about all of this? Because the strangeness of the time we live in has now linked our separation, especially extreme separation sometimes, for our own health, to avoid a venomous spread of a deadly disease. And so we must. It's terrible. I think my mind goes right away to my poor mother. My mother was in a nursing home where community prevailed. She was in a memory care facility, and her life, some would look at it and say, oh, it was awful. It was not. It was full of community. Her caregivers loved her. We went to see her. She had so much that brought her happiness. She had much that brought her sadness as well, along with lots of confusion. But when this pandemic came, in order to save her life and the lives of those who were there, community was cut off. Cut off. And it could have had a better ending. Her isolation, along with hundreds of thousands of other people around the world, isolated in these facilities, could have had a happier ending, and that her isolation could have led to her being sheltered from the disease. It did not. In some ways, it made her more vulnerable to the disease, because once it entered the nursing home, she was gone. I'm I'm living into now, I shared this yesterday, but I'm living into a time of extra isolation. Our family had already been living into some real recognition of limitations. We've not been out to eat at restaurants. We do not go out to seek, sharing in company with people who have been circulating other places. We're trying to protect our lives by keeping us somewhat separated and clear. But we got exposed, and that's the way it happens. And then when we did that, we know the next step is then you must super isolate yourself for two reasons. One is, I guess it's really only one reason, and that is if you know you were exposed, you may have it and you may be spreading it, and you've got to protect other people from what you may not know you have. And we do that. But it means that we live in isolation. We live more so in isolation. During the original shutdown, I could just feel the synapses of my brain having to realign to say that which the Bible says, which life says is deadly for human beings, which is to cut off social interaction with each other, that now that is actually the pathway to survival. And that means that survival is it's a tough path. It takes trusting counterintuitions. Counterintuitive, that's the word. It's counterintuitive these days. Fullness of life will be found now in withholding and stepping back from what the ancients said in Genesis was the essential nature of who we are. So there's some tension. There is tension introduced into our journey and our struggle to survive. And so that's the pastor doing a slice of life and where I'm at and how I feel. So how are you? How'd you like that? A little tour de force around biblical interpretation in Genesis. Who are we as human beings? We're designed to be part of community. That's why churches live out their life, their best life, as they create great communities, safe communities, places where you can be yourself, places where you can journey and inquire and seek out others that might be able to tell you some of their story and help you in your journey. But in all things, a community where grace abounds, where judgment is diminished, and the journey of life is the thing together. Community, that's the big word, the beloved community, as Martin Luther described it. Where we can be together. And the differences that life creates in us are not obstacles, they're strengths, because the differences of male and female and dark-skinned and light-skinned and different languages and all the rest of it becomes the strength of our coming together. We are stronger together as we reach out to those that are different from us or experienced as different from us. And then comes this disease which says if you want to really survive and you want to thrive, you have to go against all of that, counterintuitive. You have to separate, you have to isolate. And win against this disease which uses our best highway to drive threat and sickness and sometimes permanent disability right into our home and into our lives. So good. It's so good that the weather is so beautiful right now. Because in the great relationship of things, as human beings, relationships have to really be played down right now. What a joy that the creation seems to be stepping up and saying, hey, come, be comforted by me. I have a friend who is a photographer and growing his company in photography, and he's just moved up to the Alpine region of New Jersey, up to where the mountains are and the streams. And every day he walks outside and he films and he creates these little living videos of of the mountain streams and of the trees. He said he's taken more pictures of bears than I've ever seen in my life, and it's so nice to see it. It's because the weather's so clear, and I don't know, technology does help us to overcome the risks of relationships and takes us where we cannot go on our own. So, as I've told you some of my story in the last week, and the changes, extreme changes, some of them in terms of isolation and needing to work alone and not even really being able to interact now with the minimal level of staff we've had, until we can make sure that this virus is not in me and that I'm not going to spread it to these wonderful little kids in this school or to the teachers. Until then, we live in a modified life. I'm getting some paperwork done that I didn't get done in the first shutdown, and I'm trying to be productive. But I wonder, yesterday I asked how you were, and maybe it was my own willingness to share some of what was going on with me, and you shared through emails to revlouis@aol.com, and then to my cell phone text messages. If you have it, use it, but I'm not going to give out my cell phone number on the internet. So I'm aware. There are challenges for all of us. And some of you are challenged with prayers. I've been praying for you, for your family members. Some of it's COVID related, some of it is not. Just the regular concerns of life and health and love and relationships. I'm praying for you. I am. That's part of what I'm using my time in my little isolated area. I know that, the priests and the Roman Catholic monks, as well as other disciplines, other religions, have always seen isolation and getting off by yourself as a great way of focusing your commitment to others. I remember when one Bible teacher said in seminary that it's true that Jesus said when you're going to pray, don't pray out in public in a big show, but when you pray, go into a closet and pray. And that always felt like such a, draw off to yourself and your own things. But he explained that when you go into the closet or the shut-in room, nothing says you can't take others with you. Take the worries and cares that you know of others, or maybe even you want to actually pray with somebody else. Because we are designed to be living our lives in community. We are. This summer in Maine, when we were there on a lake in Maine, and it was very wild, domestic, but lots of wildlife. And the geese were gathering up. It's a pretty northern latitude, and the geese were gathering up to get ready for their journey south. And you could see the reformation of families. You could see as they were meeting each other at what must have been this planned truck stop on the way. They were reconnecting with families, and the way you knew that families were meeting was there would be a group of, 20 or 30 that seemed very friendly to each other, and then a group of another 20 or 30 would come near, and they would check each other out, and they were yelling at each other and saying, "You're not part of our family, you're not part of our family," and they stayed separate for their journeys. But what was really interesting was to see how they owned each other, those that they owned, that they belonged to each other. It's everywhere. It's everywhere in our existence on this tiny little planet, this blue planet. So I hope the chat today reinvigorates us to stand the tide against what separates us. That's my prayer. no physical barrier, could ultimately lead us to believe that we don't need each other, and that community and that love and sharing life together is as if that's unimportant. It's not. There are times you need to pull away, and there's certainly times where you need to defend yourself against people who do not have your best interests at heart. But in the end, finding your community, finding your people, finding your place is the pathway to life. And so I hope this virus gets out of town soon. I hope we can figure out how to defend ourselves so that we can fill back in the best life we can have, which is a life of community and a life of sharing each other's, in the Christian church I talk about sharing each other's joys and concerns. Sharing. Sometimes it's best done in the bar where people walk in and everybody knows your name. Or, a place that you frequent where people know you and they know something about your story. Maybe it's even a church community. If you don't have one, come here as soon as we're able to open up. All right, I've talked on and on for today. Partly, these are going to get a little more pressure because, other than my wife and telephone conversations with my children and things, you're it. Like, this is my avenue for talking today and yesterday and the next day. Glad you're here. I hope listening to me is helpful to you. And come back tomorrow. I'll be back here Friday, 2 o'clock. I hope the weather's as beautiful as it is today. God bless you, my friends, and I will talk to you tomorrow.